Joining us right now, Andy McCarthy, author of the best-selling book, Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency, which I think is requisite reading for all of this. And, of course, you can find him on Fox News, National Review, and elsewhere. Andy, always such a pleasure. Happy Friday to you, my friend.
Happy Friday, Dana. Great to be with you.
Of course. Good to talk with you. You have done such an amazing job, and I think really just breaking down this whole saga. These notes that have been released this week, I think, confirm a lot of the suspicions that people had as to how this case was handled and the bias that was involved. One of the things that really shocked me, and you wrote about this, you have a couple of really good pieces. I actually read one of your pieces this morning up at the Hill, that the FBI under Comey and McCabe looked as though they were ready to just shut down this entire investigation into Flynn. They could not find any criminal activity, any collusion or conspiracy from him. And then Peter Strzok got involved. Tell us about this. And I know Comey had said himself previously that the investigation didn't abide by protocol. And I didn't know if that was like a veiled an insult to someone. That struck me as, now that I'm putting all these pieces together, it's just odd. Tell us, give us the lay of the land on this.
Well, the FBI, just outside of this investigation, they have a pretty notorious problem, particularly in counter-espionage cases, because they're classified. Nobody is supposed to know about them. In criminal cases, you either get prosecuted or you don't, and the case comes to an end, and everybody knows the case has to get closed. In counter-espionage, because no one's watching them, they close cases, but they tend to not do all the ministerial things that you need to do to close it in their system. And this is one of those occasions. Strzok, in the documents that got released on Thursday, mentioned that, the fact that the case was not closed, he referred to it as serendipity, and said that they were getting the benefit out of their utter incompetence. And what he meant by that is they were supposed to close the case, and they hadn't. And because it was still open, he was able to lobby the people who would have been in charge with the ministerial task of closing it to not do that, so that he could do a few more investigative things. And one of those ended up being the interview of General Flynn that resulted ultimately in his prosecution.
Yeah, and then threatening his son and all of this as well, because that comes up a lot. The rebuttal that I hear from many on the left is, okay, well, and I can understand the legitimacy of this if perhaps, the finer details weren't available, but they keep saying, okay, well, then why did Flynn lie? Why did he lie then? And it's not just as simple as, which may sound crazy to people who believe nuance is dead, but it's not as simple as that. And I thought you really did a great job in breaking that down. Tell listeners across the country, there is this perjury trap. There is such a thing as this.
Oh, there's absolutely a perjury trap. A perjury trap is just when you interview someone with the hope or expectation that the person will tell a provable lie. And what I mean by provable lie is one that you can prosecute him for, that you have enough information to show that what's being said is inaccurate, and it's arguably at least willfully inaccurate, and therefore you have a basis to prosecute him. Now, here's why this one's an outlier, Dana, compared to that. If I were doing an investigation on an organized crime guy, and I brought him into the grand jury and he was stupid enough to talk to me instead of taking the theft, I could ask him some questions that I want the answers to, and either way it goes for me, I get a benefit. If he tells me the truth, I now have evidence I didn't have before. If he lies to me, I have a case that I can prosecute against him, which I can then use to try to squeeze him to give me the information that's vital to advancing my investigation, and that's why it's done. Here, they didn't try to get Flynn to lie in order to advance an investigation. They knew what was on the tape recordings of the interviews or the conversations he had with the Russian ambassador. They got him to lie so that they could get him out of there. I think the interesting thing for people to understand, this was not to advance their knowledge about what Russia was trying to do to the United States. It was not to advance their knowledge of the Trump-Russia investigation and what direction it should go in. Here's the problem they had. This was not about Flynn directly. It was about President Trump. They wanted to continue the investigation while Trump was president, which is not an easy thing to do when the president has the authority to shut an investigation down, but is an impossible thing to do if you have a national security advisor like Flynn, who is an experienced intelligence guy who knows how it all works on the intelligence side, where the secrets are, how people exploit information and the like, and who was loyal to Trump, not to the intelligence community, or I guess we now call them the policy community. So they needed to get, if they wanted to continue this investigation, they needed to get Flynn out of there. And what you see in some of these documents that we've seen is the way that they wrestled with, is there any way that we can marginalize him? Is there any way we can give him a defensive briefing and then kind of spook him and paralyze him on Russia and make him back off and get him out of this? And they had 3 or 4 different suggestions before they landed on the perjury trap. And with each one, they realized he's the national security advisor. We have to tell him things. He's going to find out about this. And I think what they finally realized is you either have to take him out or the investigation's over, because one way or the other, he was going to figure out the full extent of the Trump-Russia investigation, including the fact that they had investigated Trump's campaign during 2016.
Yeah, and you, as you've written, you've touched on this too in your book, Ball of Collusion, because Michael Flynn, when he worked with the previous administration, I mean, he was jettisoned essentially because he had criticized the former President Barack Obama's some of his foreign policy. And so immediately he was at odds with not just that administration, but also all of those individuals that the administration had placed in different positions. I mean, is that a pretty accurate assessment?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, if you think about this in a kind of a big picture, common sense way, the Obama people, I mean, I'm sure there are some people who are convinced that Trump is like, a Kremlin mole or whatever. Right. But I think for the most part, the Obama people weren't trying to either take Trump down or make it impossible for him, or at least very difficult for him to govern for sport. That was not what their intention was. They wanted to preserve things like, for example, the Iran nuclear deal and a number of their other policies. And they knew that, Trump's presidency meant either the death knell for some of those things, or at least unwinding them and cutting them back in a big way. So they've wanted to make it impossible for him to govern. The whole idea, I think, of this investigation was to hamstring his ability to staff the administration and to pursue the agenda he ran on, and also to try to find a crime or something they could impeach him on to shorten this thing, or at least make sure he gets defeated in the next election. So I don't think they were doing this for fun and games. They had, they're cold, but they had real reasons for doing this.
Gosh dang. The president said yesterday in a press conference that he was asked whether or not he could see Lieutenant General Flynn becoming a part of the administration again, and he had said that, that's something that an idea that he had, something that he thought of about bringing him back into the administration. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, that would be, he's a well-decorated veteran, and it seems more personality than anything else as to why there was a dislike of him with the previous administration. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that General Flynn's been through a terrible time. They can never make him whole again. I don't know I don't know what he'd even desire to do at this point. I think for him, the most important thing at this point would be to be exonerated.
Yes.
And I think, Dana, that he has some hope now. I don't think he wants a pardon. I think he would take a pardon as a last resort. Who wouldn't, right? But I think he now sees a path where I don't know if Sidney Powell's going to succeed in convincing this judge to throw the case out on outrageous government misconduct. The real legal remedy here would be to give him his plea back. Yeah. And if you gave him his plea back, that is, if you vacated the guilty plea, the ball would then be in the Justice Department's court about whether they want to go forward with this piece of whatever diplomatic thing we say on the air to call it.
Right.
And I think the Justice Department would look at this and see how ugly a prosecution this would be, how much awful information would come out about the way the Justice Department, and especially the FBI, conducted themselves. And they'd say, we don't want to prosecute this case. This guy shouldn't have been investigated in the first place. Yeah. And if that happens, he can at least say he was exonerated. It won't make him whole. It won't give him all the millions he's had to pay in legal fees and the anxiety over what's happened to his family, the threat to prosecute his son. I don't think anyone can ever fix that, but he would at least get that back.
Yeah, he would get something back. Last question for you. We're speaking with Andy McCarthy, author of the best-selling book, Ball of Collusion. The big thing that I hear from everyone, conservatives, libertarians, independents on this issue is, what is the price to pay for such clear abuse of federal authority? People see Peter Strzok. He seemed almost comically smug during the hearing. They see Lisa Page and her tweeting, great job, and holding up a wine glass on Twitter, and they're almost blatantly celebrating the fact that they are untouchable. Andy McCabe, even Comey to an extent. What is there? I don't know if there's a criminal path to pursue with this, or even what is within the authority of the executive, or what if this is a congressional matter. But surely there's a level of criminality here on how they handled all of this, and the disparity between the Flynn treatment and then the interviews with, say, Huma Abedin and Cheryl Mills when discussing the Clinton server, and they lied to the FBI, and nothing was ever. There was no follow up. There wasn't even so much as a wrist slap. What can be done, and how do you answer that question for all of those out there who say we're terrified now? Just for us, there needs to be a precedent set.
I think a couple of things. Number one, we know from just what the Attorney General has said in the last couple of weeks that this is being looked at as a serious criminal investigation. And I think you and I have talked about this before, Dana. It's a very tough criminal investigation because not all abuse of power is a clear violation of a criminal statute. And when people abuse their power, usually the remedy is that you got to take the power away from them. That's the most important thing, regardless of whether they get prosecuted. So
right.
Even though I'm as frustrated as other people are, it's not exactly true that these guys have not been held accountable, because, if we notice, none of them is in power anymore. I mean,
right.
They've been either fired or, whatever has happened to all of them. And I think this will be looked at under the civil rights statutes. It's a very hard case, but at least the civil rights statutes are designed to deal with situations where government officials abuse their power to interfere with people's rights. As I say, they're very, very tough cases to make. And I think you do have individual instances. This may not be an overarching conspiracy, but there are places here where people made false statements, where they, misled the court, where they misled the Congress. And I imagine that those things are being looked at very carefully to see whether you have enough proof of criminal intent that you can make those cases. So I don't think they're wasting their time. And the one other thing I would say about it is, unlike the normal case where the Justice Department can't talk about what it finds in an investigation, when the Justice Department investigates itself, even if it can't come up with crimes, we should at least get a report that's a complete narrative of what happened here. And even if you can't prosecute these people, this should follow them around for the rest of their lives for what happened here.
Amen to that. Well, Andy McCarthy, author of the best-selling book, Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency, required reading on this topic, and also former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney. Andy, we so appreciate your legal expertise on this, and I think particularly that last one, that was a great point to make as well. There has been some accountability, so it's good to remind people of that. Andy, all the best to you. Hope you have a great weekend, my friend.